Good morning. I would like to talk to you today about starting wargaming for very, very cheap. So, Purple Druid, who has a Substack and is active in the wargaming community, turned me on to the idea of using wooden blocks. Now, prior to this, I had used cardboard backing material from cut up boxes and glued paper tokens over top of it. But Stephen has convinced me that what's necessary is to use these wooden blocks. They do give you a little bit more of a 3D feel. And as an added bonus, they don't blow around when the wind or the whirlwind of children or a fan or something like that gets over the wargaming table. And suddenly your wargame disappears in a flurry of small cardboard pieces that are hard to reassemble. Anyway, so I had previously created these token sheets out of non-open source images for my own personal use, but I realized pretty quickly that everyone could benefit from this very cheap entry point into the hobby. And so what I have done is I've gone out, found open source images that I thought were necessary to represent the different kinds of troop classes in most of the older war games like WRG versions 1, 2, 3, etc., chainmail, and some of the other earlier rules from Tony Bath, Charles Grant, Wesson Craft, etc. So I put those out there on Drive-Thru RPG for $2. And here's what you get. Of course, you could screenshot this stuff and be on your way, but I would hope that you would reward the work that's gone into this. So the token sheets, we start with legal notices and then an introduction to the two troop types, both as used in the early WRG stuff, as well as the name that you'll often see inside open source rule sets like Swords and Wizardry, 0E, 1E, and BX clones almost all have these troop types in there. And to do mass battles, you need some kind of representation of them on the table. So I give a description of what I mean by these different troop types. And in general, it conforms to 0E, 1st E, and BX, as well as WRG and chainmail. And then here are the tokens themselves. Only one of them's color because decolorizing the camelry, it just didn't look good. And then finally, here's the token sheet number one, including some casualty markers, some markers for obstacles, escalades, and then a few ships, caltrops, things like that. Some messenger banners, some nobles that can be denoted with this. And then finally, token sheet two, which has things that are more specific to Men in Metal or WRG, but some of these can also be used in other wargaming rule sets. Finally, I give resources, and then I try to give in every one of the documentation, every one of the documents that I produce and put on Drive-Thru RPG with open source artwork, where the artwork came from, what the rights actually are and stuff, including active links, so you can go out there and prove whether what I say is true or not. What I don't see a lot of other people in the OSR community doing with their public domain artwork is documentation, and that does tend to violate the Creative Commons license under which most of these are currently found on the internet. I would encourage my fellow hobbyists to be more diligent in showing people what's what. Anyway, I will move on now. The next thing to talk about is how do you set up the table? Green felt is fairly inexpensive. You can get a couple sheets of that stuff. I think they come in like 4x4 sheets. I could be wrong about that. Same thing for blue felt. You can get that fairly inexpensively off of Amazon. These blocks themselves can be sourced off Amazon. I did not want to paint them. You can get them raw and then primer them. You have to primer them because they just soak up paint. So you could primer them and then paint them different colors yourself with rattle cans, or you could go the route of rewarding the Chinese for all their efforts and buying baggies of 100 blocks. Now, inside each baggie comes 25 green, 25 yellow, 25 red, and 25 blue blocks that are 15 millimeters across. That's 0.625 inches. And those bags run at, I think it was like a little bit less than $8 a piece. I ended up ultimately getting like 5 or 6 bags of that stuff. So I would have 600 figures, quote unquote. But you don't have to do that at all. As a matter of fact, when I was still building this out, I would basically place the front line of the unit and then a couple for the secondary and third tertiary quaternary ranks, just to show, you can multiply across like 4 columns and 2 ranks would be eight figures, right? Anybody can look down the table and do the math. Now, as far as movement trays, it did a very similar El Cheapo route. Someone suggested using tile that you can get at Home Depot for like tiling your bathroom or flooring. I went the cheapest of the cheap route and got vinyl tiling. It cost me like 67 cents at Home Depot. No, it was at Lowe's because I get my military discount there. Anyway, it was like 67 cents per inch. They could cut you a 12-inch strip. I ended up getting 15 inches wide because the kids there didn't really operate the machine as tightly as they possibly could. So you get a 15-inch wide by 12-foot long strip of vinyl tiling that ends up costing you like 12 bucks out the door with tax. And you can cut that down into movement trays of any size you like with just like an X-Acto knife or a box cutter. And it's very easy. And of course, you need a straight edge, like a metal square. But dead easy to make movement trays that are exactly the size you need for the table. What you'll see in some of these early drawings is the trays I made were a little bit large. In later videos, you'll see that the trays are more conforming to the size of the movement elements because it is so dang cheap. They're almost fire and forget and kind of throwaway. I've got several of them now. I've got like 9 foot of this material still left over. So plenty of extra to do what I like. Because it's final, it doesn't warp like cardboard does with varying humidity. And so I've been told, and I haven't done this yet, but I've been told that you can also use it as backing for terrain pieces. Now, the vinyl flexes too much for me to believe that. But if you got other kind of tiling in there, some El Cheapo wood tiling, you would be in business. Or some El Cheapo, ceramic tiling. Again, no problem with warping. You're going to be able to use, um, the spackle, the drywall stuff on there and create hills and other terrain pieces with no problem. Anyway, I've prolonged this video way too long. Oh, last thing to mention. So in chainmail, they use cannons. And as part of the cannon measurement stick, you need dowel rods. Now, I went with a 5/8 dowel for both the light cannon and heavy cannon. And my experience with this was kind of hit and miss. You have to create alternating bands of white and black. I did this with white and black paint primer. It's like a dual primer and paint. But the quality of the dowel rod was not great. So even trying to tape things off and be diligent about it, it still was not very good. I used some black marker to kind of fill in things, and I suppose you could use some acrylic paints to make it look more neat. But I got a brainstorm idea from watching Pub Games, which is another wargaming company that you can find out there on the internet that does these wooden block Kriegspiel kind of movement stuff. And what they've done for their measuring rods is they've created an adhesive. They've created a printout on adhesive backing that you can peel off and then roll onto the dowel rod. I haven't tried this yet. I think it could be done pretty easily using like what do you call it? Mailing labels, like the large mailing labels. I could print some of them white and some of them black, or print them out and then color them in. Doesn't matter. I think they would adhere and do okay on the dowel rod. So that's going to be my next experiment in El Cheapo Wargaming. But between the blocks, the printouts, as you can see here on the Wargaming table, if you have just a few minis, and my paint job on these are pretty roughed in at this point. These are not finished minis at all. But if you have a few of those to represent notable figures, and you have these blocks that are color coded, right? Green I use for light troops and missileers and skirmishers, and yellow I use for medium horse and heavy foot, and then finally red for the heaviest units, which are heavy horse, armored foot, and Tony Bath would describe those as dismounted knights. But if you have your color coded blocks and you use a glue stick and print out the token sheet and cut it up, glue those onto the front of these blocks and place them on the table in these movement trays, and then have a few minis representing notable figures like nobles or heroes or champions or whatever. It's pretty easy to get enough detail that you can start doing play-by-post with your friends, as we're doing now with Purple Druid and several others that I've connected with on Discord. And you can do chainmail battles. You can do old WRG rule sets. You can do pretty much anything you like, depending on what tokens you print out. Oh, that's the last thing I wanted to note. So if you're using the Men in Metal token sheets, because these blocks are 15 millimeters and the token sheets are set up for 1 inch, you have to scale it down to 62%. What I would recommend to also is one of those token sheets will print out just fine at 300 dots per inch. It's the second token sheet with just like the casualty markers and things like that. It's just fine to just say print that out at 62%. Keep the DPI settings that are probably normal for your PDF, and it'll work just fine. The first token sheet, because there's so much detail, if you scale it down to 62, my printer just barfed. My printer would not print that. I had to reduce it down to 100 dots per inch and 62%, and then it printed out just fine. And then you cut up the stuff and glue it on, and it looks good enough on the table. As you can tell, I'll just flip back here to the original image. These look very good up close, and you'll be able to see them just fine when you're standing over the table too. All right, hope you have a great day, and that should get you started in wargaming for a very inexpensive investment.